Hi everyone, this is my February 2017 book haul. I managed to get a few books here, so let's get right to it. The very first book is actually one of my Book of the Month Club selections. I ended up getting 2 books again this month because I couldn't make a decision because there were so many good books to choose from. So the first one is called Behind Her Eyes, and I've heard a bit about this book now. I've heard it on some podcasts. I've also seen it in stores, so I'm really excited for this one. This is a thriller, and it's sort of being equated kind of to Gone Girl, which I never fully believe whenever I hear people say that, but I'm willing to give it a shot. It sounds like a great read. Basically, this is about a woman who moves to a new town. She's a single mom, and she gets a job. One night she goes out to a bar and just meets this man who seems absolutely perfect. They hit it off, they chat all night, and it's just great and wonderful. And then at the end of the night they end up kissing, and she's really excited about the possibilities of that little flirtatious romance. And then the next day she goes into work and she finds out that he's actually her boss, which creates for an awkward situation, and he sits down and has a chat with her, and they sort of agree upon just being friends and just not really putting any emphasis of what went down the night before, and she agrees with that. Also, he's married, so there is that. And as time goes on, she ends up meeting this man's wife, who's very lonely in the area because she doesn't know anybody. They've also just moved there, and they end up befriending one another. The wife obviously doesn't know about some time they spent together prior to all that. So the single mom slowly starts to uncover kind of suspicious little things about the marriage, because the husband, his name's David, seems very controlling, and Adele, the wife, seems a bit scared of him. And Louise, who's the main character in the book, doesn't really understand the dynamics of their marriage, and she's slowly getting the hang of things and learning more and more about them. And the biggest appeal of this book for me is the fact that everyone claims that you cannot predict this ending, that it's a crazy, crazy ending, and no one could ever predict what it was. So I'm very fascinated by it. I really want to know. I want to know what the ending is. So I'm really looking forward to reading this book and seeing what the crazy thing that actually happens is. I desperately want to know. The second book that I got, also from my Book of the Month Club, is called Pachinko, and it's by Min Jin Lee. And I've heard also lots about this book. I listened to the New York Times book podcast, and they were talking about this book with the author of the book, and it was very informative and interesting. Basically, this starts out in the 1900s in Korea, and there's a girl. She's from a pretty poor family, but her family has pretty high hopes for her to get married and start a family. Then she has like a quick, brief romance with a man, and she ends up pregnant. He doesn't end up marrying her, so she's about to bring a lot of shame onto her family. She ends up meeting with this minister who's willing to marry her, so she ends up doing that, and that really saves them from everyone finding out that she had a child from a completely random person. And this minister ends up having to move to Japan, so she ends up moving with him, and they face a lot of discrimination and just have real hardships in Japan. And from listening to the podcast with the author of this book, it sounds like the Koreans who moved to Japan had a really hard time being accepted and being treated fairly and equally. And it's just something that I honestly don't know much about, and it'll be a very interesting book to read and definitely interesting perspective, so I'm really, really excited to pick this up. This is kind of a slightly hefty book, but from everything that I've heard, it sounds like a great read. The next book is called The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead, and I've heard great things about this book, and I'm really interested in it. This is a fiction, but as if the Underground Railroad was an actual railroad, which I think is a very unique perspective on it. The main character in this book is a girl named Kara, and she's a slave, and she decides to run away and escape north, and she meets a man named Caesar, who's also a slave, and both of them embark on this journey on this Underground Railroad, and this book takes them from different areas that they get to travel to as they're making their way through, and I guess each and every area that they end up in turns out into like a completely different experience for them. There is some people they're hiding from, there's a lot of danger and a lot of obstacles on their way, and it just sounds like a really creative book about a very tough topic, and it just of such unique perspective on a real thing, but if you take it literally. So I'm really interested in reading this. I've heard people mention this on BookTube. I can't remember who it was. If it was you, thank you for mentioning this book. So I'm really looking forward to reading it, and it's going to be a great read. The next book that I got, I've actually read before. It's called We Should All Be Feminist, and this is by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. And this is a fabulous, fabulous book. It's very small. It's a very short read. It's technically an essay, but it's just so full of great, great, great points about why we should all be feminists, why people shouldn't argue with that, and why we should just all accept that fact. So this is a great read. If you haven't read it and you're looking for a quick read, this is a good one to go with. Very, very interesting. And I'm actually currently reading Americana by this author, which is a slightly bigger book, but it's a fabulous, fabulous read. I really enjoy it. It's just absolutely incredible. So I can't wait to read more books by this author. They're all wonderful. The next book is A Brief History of 7 Killings by Marlon James, and I haven't seen much about this book, and I randomly picked it up at the bookstore because it sounded interesting. This is about an attack on Bob Marley in 1976 when he was about to play at a big concert, and things were kind of sketchy at that time, so this is a fiction, obviously, but it just explores a little bit more into who the assassins were and where that was going and what if they actually succeeded and things like that. Just sounded like an interesting read. It's pretty hefty, but it's just, I don't know much about Bob Marley at all, and I thought that since this year I'm trying to read different books about different topics, this would be an interesting one to pick up, and it's also a Man Booker Prize winner, so should be a great read. Last but not least is Lincoln in the Bardo by George Sanders. I've seen this book everywhere, so I wasn't initially gonna pick it up, and then I thought, okay, I will, because it sounds like a great, great read. And I've also listened to a podcast with this author, and it was very interesting and very informative. This book is about the son of the president, whose name is Willie, who ends up dying. And I guess this book just takes place during the night after he dies. He's put in a crypt, and Abraham goes in there and spends time with his son, and he visits him a few times, and people notice that, and I guess that part of the book is real, but everything else is made up by the author. But it's interesting that he chose such a morbid topic to talk about, but I guess it has some humor in it too, so that sounds really interesting, and just an interesting take on a story that I didn't know much about, so that should be great. And apparently this author wrote a bunch of short stories before. I'm a big fan of short stories. I haven't read any of his short stories in the past, so if I like this book, then I will have to check out the short stories as well. So that's it for my February haul. Please let me know if you have any of these books, and also please let me know if you're looking forward to reading any of these. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.